from the very moment that a person goes into hospital post-stroke, you've got to be thinking about communication from the outset. That person with aphasia applying for that job could be the best colleague you need.
In this episode, we're talking to Derek Munn, Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, about the work they do with people with all kinds of speech and language difficulties, and in particular, those with aphasia. Hi, and welcome everybody, and we hope you enjoy this podcast called On the Tip of My Tongue. Now, I'm Rob Edwards.
And I'm Jonathan Hirons.
And this podcast is a follow-up to a film which Jonathan made about aphasia. So, what is aphasia? Well, it's a condition caused by some kind of injury to the brain, which is often, could be a stroke, or could be just falling off a bike. And it affects your ability to use language in all its forms. Speaking, writing, reading, sending text, whatever. 350,000 people in the UK suffer from a debilitating condition called aphasia. Fewer than half this number suffer from Parkinson's, and yet most people have heard of Parkinson's, whilst almost nobody has heard of aphasia.
Let me introduce you to a friend of the show who's got a fantastic podcast.
Hi, I'm Talia Lazarus, and in 2021 I was relearning how to walk, and in 22 I was learning how to run 21 kilometres. So join me on I Got Back Up as I share powerful life stories. Unexpected challenges and moments can defeat us, but the human spirit possesses an immense strength that allows us to rise above the darkest moments, rebuilding our lives in extraordinary ways.
You can listen to Talia's podcast on all the usual channels.
Good afternoon to Jonathan and to Rob, and to those listening, whether it's morning, afternoon or evening, when you listen. It's a pleasure to be on the Tip of My Tongue podcast today. My name is Derek Munn, and I'm the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. So I have a job at the Royal College which embraces working with the four governments of the United Kingdom and the parliaments and assemblies, managing the policy legislative work and influencing campaigning work we do, also with the NHS in each country and other agencies. Other bits of my work include the international work of the Royal College, the work we do on making the profession greener, more sustainable, and also the lead on the Jargon co-production, which is working towards both the Royal College as an organisation, but also the profession of speech and language therapy, doing everything it does in genuine partnership with people who have lived experience of speech, language, communication and inspiring needs.
Hi, Derek. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's great to have you with us. Tell us a bit about the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. How did it start, and who does it serve?
The Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists is the professional body for speech and language therapists in the UK. You don't have to be a member to be a speech therapist in the UK, but 96% of speech therapists in the UK choose to be members. And there are around 22,000 speech therapists in the UK today. The profession, there were various kind of voice doctors and things in the 18th and 19th century, but the professionals we think of it actually got going after the First World War, where soldiers were coming back with traumatic head or brain injury, sometimes injury to the apparatus of the voice and the throat, and sometimes just the psychological consequences of battle. Doctors and others were realising there's an issue here that needs to be dealt with. And some of the early work in what became speech and language therapy was actually in that area of post-conflict trauma, which remains an area that we work in right now. There's a whole team of speech therapists at the military hospitals, for example. The Royal College was founded in 1946. Now, if you remember the film The King's Speech, you'll remember Lionel Logue. We always joke about it in a couple of ways. Speech and language therapy is an overwhelmingly female profession. 96% of speech therapists are women, only 4% are men. And that's true in most countries. And if you're looking back to 1946, it was a time when most women gave up work when they got married. So most practicing speech therapists were unmarried. So we have the letter that they sent to the king in 1946, where Lionel Logue says, I've helped you out. We're setting up a college. Would you be our royal patron? And if you look at the list of signatories, it's Miss Phyllis such and such and Miss Gladys such and such. And in the middle, just this one bloke, Lionel Logue, which is pretty much how things still are today. Speech therapy, a lot of it, you might find this interesting, Rob, for a long time was based in drama schools, acting schools, because the voice element was seen as akin to the work that was done in actors training. So right up until the 70s, speech therapy courses were based in drama schools. And then it became a degree profession in the early 70s. And today, about 60% of speech therapists work with children, about 40% work with adults. And within that adult cohort, the biggest single area, it tends to get talked about by the pathway, not the condition. So rather than aphasia, we would talk about stroke. But the biggest single condition that adult therapists work with would be stroke.
Well, in the film, which as I said, I think it's an absolutely wonderful film. So he was a pioneer, was he?
Pioneer, and he was one of the founding members
of the thing. One of the things you get from the film is, very powerfully, I think, is how the old school doctors are treating the king, sticking marbles in his mouth. And he has a sort of therapeutic kind of approach, addressing the whole person, his background, psychology, and that's a major element of modern way of thinking.
It's absolutely right, Mark. Speech therapists often say that they don't mostly use what's called a medical model. They mostly use what's called a biopsychosocial model. Now, it's undoubtedly the case that if I've got, as some stroke survivors do, challenges with the musculature of the throat, which means that I could choke, well, I want a pretty medical style intervention to check that I've done the right screening. There are things where medicine's exactly what you need. But actually, if you're talking about the totality of human language and communication, it's a social phenomenon. And it's about the way that we interact and use, and about how I feel, and about my confidence, and all of those things need to go into it.
We sometimes use on this podcast, we have used, I think, the phrase, you more your voice than you are your body. Me in a wheelchair is me in a wheelchair, but me without my voice being able to speak fluently and clearly, somehow I lose myself. That is the expression of my personality and my identity.
Yes, if you think about what defines Homo sapiens as a species, it is the language function.
Obviously, we're concerned with aphasia on this particular, and it's interesting to know your background at the college and yourself as well. What's your feeling on how we are at the moment with aphasia as a group of people?
That's very interesting. I'm actually just in the Royal College building on Monday. I hosted a meeting of the Aphasia Alliance, which is where all of the organisations from across the UK that have an interest in aphasia come together, basically to talk about issues of common concern. So that would include the Tavistock Trust, with whom you're familiar. It would include the Stroke Association and Chest, Heart and Stroke Scotland, but also a lot of local aphasia support groups, many of which are collaborations between stroke survivors, if that's the term you fill in the podcast, or let me know your thought, and speech and language therapists. And we chatted a bit about, Jonathan, about this when we were thinking about this podcast. Because when I go to meetings of the Aphasia Alliance, people are very keen to say aphasia is about more than stroke. There's more than one kind of aphasia, and there's lots of reasons why you might have aphasia, and stroke is only one of them. And one of our great parliamentary supporters, General Lord Ramsbottom, who died last year, actually at the end of his life had primary progressive aphasia, which is effectively a kind of dementia. And we're running a big campaign about that now, actually, with NHS England to try and get a specialist service re-established.
Right.
So I know that aphasia and stroke are like a Venn diagram, but quite a lot of the influencing and lobbying work is based around the fact that if we're talking in the English context, integrated care systems and trusts, and there would be equivalents in the devolved nations, are commissioning a stroke pathway. commissioning a multidisciplinary stroke pathway. And for us, there have been a number of challenges and pinch points around that, which we continue to work on. The first is what tends to get called safe staffing. We would prefer to say safe and effective staffing. And can you quantify how many speech therapists you need in the stroke pathway? It's really hard, but it's easier actually to do that in the context of an acute ward than it is to say how many speech therapists you need with a population of deprived children in a multilingual. The challenge we've had at the acute end of the pathway has been that partly to do with resource and partly to do with concerns for safety, the focus all goes on SWAT. It all goes on dysphagia assessment. And we have to work very hard to say, from the very moment that a person goes into hospital post-stroke, you've got to be thinking about communication, right from the outset. The other challenge we have is further down the track. After discharge, after the community rehabilitation that you get, then what? People talk all the time about the cliff edge, about the availability of ongoing rehabilitation in the community, but also about, and this relates to what Wes Streeting has been talking about, the NHS needing to be a driver of economic growth. Because I talk all the time with people with experience of stroke who are saying, when do I get back to work? When do I get back to making a positive contribution to society? When do I get back with the voice, such as I now have it, to doing the things which make me an impact? And sometimes people have said to me, Derek, I don't want Of course, day centres matter. Of course, rehab provision has its place, but that's not where I see my future as a stroke survivor. So we've got an interesting influencing all along that path. Now, aphasia, Jonathan mentioned this to me when we spoke last week, is one of those ones that nobody knows what it is, right? Unless you've got experience, you've not really heard of it. I actually had a conversation with Google a few years ago about whether searches for dysphasia could get automatically rerouted to aphasia because of the confusion between those two terms. Part of the challenge for me is that there are lots of issues that speech and language therapists work with which nobody's heard of. There's a campaign going on right now about what's called dysarthria, which is where the voice is very weak, common, for example, in Parkinson's, and a group of passionate people trying to promote awareness of it. The single most common condition that we work with is called developmental language disorder, and it's where the brain has difficulty processing language effectively. And so, do I want more people to know about aphasia and heard of it? Yes, I do, but I have to be honest and say it's not the only condition for which I have that challenge.
Right. One of the things we've already had somebody on a podcast who's is typically the person you've just been speaking about, Tom, who is 35, and he's not had a stroke. He fell down some stairs, and he's desperate to get back into work, but he's finding the whole thing too difficult, well, quite difficult for him to do. And presuming in your experience, you've got a load of people who are in that sort of situation.
It becomes about joined up government. And actually, well, this goes back to your initial question to me about the Royal College. We are the professional body for speech therapists, but part of our charitable objectives, as it's put, is about making society a better place for people who experience communication and sparring barriers. And part of that is saying to government, be joined up here. Wes is right to say that the NHS can be a driver of economic growth. Meanwhile, we've got the Department for Work and Pensions talking about social security reform and getting people back into work. Would join the damn thing up.
Can you make workplaces more aphasia-friendly, if you like? Like you can put in ramps for people with wheelchairs. There must be practical steps that can be taken to make employers aware of what they could do to help people with aphasia in their work.
Yes, absolutely, Robin. And many of them will be common. So we have a free training product called Communication Access UK, and we encourage organisations to sign up. It's a free basic training. It says, whether you're meeting somebody with aphasia or someone who stammers severely or someone who does not speak for whatever reason, or uses a communication device, or because the way that their neurodiversity expresses has difficulty with eye contact or conversational turn taking, the whole Eastboroughs. Here's some basics that you need to do. Take your time. Make appropriate eye contact. Ask people what help works for them. And in the working context, make sure that every time you've got a voice-activated system, you've got a manual thing so that people aren't reliant on fluency and volume.
Right.
So to engage with voice activation. Realise that people working on screen are equal through a keyboard, and particularly if you link that to voice synthesis software, well, actually, everybody at home on a keyboard is equal in the workplace all of a sudden. Yeah? There's no reason not to do that. Think about how you set up meetings, think about the training people have, which we do at the Royal College, because most people who work at the Royal College are not speech and language therapists. So the first time I would take colleagues into a meeting and say, look, we're working with people with aphasia here. Here's what you need to remember. Here's the basics. It only takes 5 minutes. And there is so much overlap between communicating effectively with people with communication challenge and basic politeness. That's as true in the workplace as is any other context.
Yeah, I think I'm a little cynical about, I'm not by you, but by the whole thing with people. I was listening to something the other day about people trying to get a job, and it's, so we say someone who hasn't got anything like aphasia or has just got on, just looking for a job, it's quite difficult for them. It can be doubly difficult for anybody with some sort of disability, either physical or otherwise. It must be a hard job, a hard sell for your organisation to say to people, oh, well, we'll help people be better off in the workplace, when people with companies haven't got the time or the inclination to do this sort of thing. They just want someone to do the job.
That's sometimes the case. And there's sometimes the push factor of people knowing that they need to be shown to be disability friendly. Yeah. But there are people out there who are genuinely committed to it, but don't know what they should do. If you say to them, it's not that hard, I know that people like Stroke Association do it anyway. What are the basic tips? What can you give to people and say to people to go, don't be scared about this. That person with aphasia applying for that job could be the best colleague you need.
We should have a conversation about maybe the practical tips that you can do with someone with aphasia, how to get the best out of them.
And making those available in the downloaded form that people can give to prospective employers or whatever it might be. Yeah.
But it would be something like, take your time.
Yes. Yeah, we tend to say take your time, ask people what helps. It's interesting because if you talk to people who stammer, they will say, never finish my sentences. But sometimes someone with stammer or someone with aphasia will say, I can't get a word. What is it? Well, I can respond to it. Yeah. But otherwise, I will never, I hope, never finish the sentence of somebody who is stammering. Or when you tell people that, they go, oh, yes, of course. Because we have this natural human instinct to keep up the flow of conversation. And we have a built-in intolerance to silence. So you get this particularly, it varies by culture. In Britain, it's 4.8 seconds. Yeah. And you can tell if you're ever in a conversation, stay quiet and count to 5. You will never get there. Somebody will say something. We cannot tolerate a silence of 5 seconds.
Gosh.
If you're working with somebody with a communication device, I always give Stephen Hawking as the example, but I'm quite commonly in meetings with people who use what's called AAC, assisted or registered communication. And of course, the protocol there is you're having a conversation, but it can take them 5 minutes to construct a sentence using eye gaze or whatever. And during that time, you wait and you maintain eye contact. 5 minutes later, the sentence comes back and you give your sentence and on you go with the conversation. So, it's a fascinating area.
There's one of the things that they teach salespeople is they do their pitch, whatever it might be, and then shut up. Because it's exactly what you said. And the first person to say something is usually the other person because they can't stand the silence of, as you say, 5 seconds or whatever.
Journalists do it too. So if you ever do media
yeah.
training, one of the tricks you're told to watch out for is where the journalist just goes quiet and you fill the gap.
Same trick, different profession. Rob, obviously to you this is quite interesting because obviously you've had voice training, haven't you, in your time?
I have, when I was with the RNC, yeah.
I'm going back to your thing, Derek, about originally everything was in drama schools, etc. Was it the same for you, Rob? Can you remember that far back?
Barely. Yeah, but yes, no, in drama school, yeah, of course, voice training, which was both a sort of technical thing, breathing and whatever, and also a sort of psychological thing, a sort of therapy thing. I don't know whether that is really speech therapy, as we're talking about now. I don't think it is. What I had was a sort of rather specific professional training.
You're right, Rob. There can still be a misconception in some quarters that speech therapists do elocution. If I'm working with a kid with a Scouse accent, I want them to talk Scouse. And actually, one of the things we use with MPs, when MPs are elected, we send them a note about speech and language therapy. But on one side, we have a thing about voice tips, and hydration and looking after, and the MPs get it straight away because politicians talk for a living. So they just, that's a way into them because they immediately understand.
No, exactly what you said. I think the training, to be fair to the RSC, there was no accent correction or anything like that. They'd be very offended by that, even though most, I suppose, certainly Shakespearean actors would speak in what's known as RP, received pronunciation. There's certainly no attempt to overrule someone's accent. But yes, but it is what you said. It's actually just maintaining the health of the voice and the voice box and being able to, if you're going to speak like a politician for long periods, being able to do that in a healthy way and then you don't get hoarse and lose your voice. Sorry, I don't have anything to say about my acting training.
That's it. You can go now then.
I'm going to go back and look at your back catalogue, Rob, and see some of the stuff you were in.
Silences, let's time it. That's fascinating. Are you saying that in other cultures 5 seconds is nothing? People wait 10 seconds.
There are cultures which can tolerate very long periods of silence. And I remember I had a Spanish teacher one time who was Argentinian, and she said, that in her culture, effectively, the toleration time was 0.
I can't imagine in Italy that, it's not down to a nanosecond. You're listening to On the Tip of My Tongue, a podcast dedicated to raising awareness about aphasia. If you're enjoying the podcast and finding it helpful, please subscribe to it by clicking on the Support the Show link in the description. Thank you.
So going back to what we want to do, or what we're trying to do, is raise awareness. One thing that we picked up, partly talking to Suzanne Beek and just things that we picked up on our own, is that in fact there are a lot of people working about aphasia, but they tend to be research-based rather than like us, or like me anyway. Somebody who's actually got it and is living with it and so on. Have you got a thought about whether should there be more opportunities for people with aphasia to talk about aphasia rather than someone who has, say, research? It sounds very bad. I don't know. That sounds like I'm running them down.
Perfect. You're 100% right. So, yes, you're absolutely correct. If there's a debate in Parliament about, I think it would probably be about stroke services. We will make sure that we co-badge our briefing with the Stroke Association along its doing chain. But if you really want to make an impact, use a person with lived experience. And then journalists, this for journalists from the beginning. We need the case study, we need the mother and baby, we need whatever it is. Let me give you an example. In Northern Ireland, there's legislation around mental capacity. So this is the determination of when somebody is mentally fit to make decisions about their life and their care. And that can overlap with language because sometimes people can appear to have completely coded through language, and that is masking an inability really to understand and consent. In other cases, people's communication challenges are such that even though they have mental capacity, they can't communicate effectively. And when the mental capacity legislation was going through in Northern Ireland, we took in front of the committee of politicians a woman called Clodagh, and she was a police officer who'd had a stroke in her 30s. And she'd been left with only eye gaze for a period of time. So there was a point where she was going to be declared mentally incapable, and her decisions about her life and care taken from her. And then a speech therapist noticed that she had eye gaze. Yeah, bought a communication board, and off they went. And putting Clodagh in front of that parliamentary committee was what got speech language and communication written into the Northern Ireland legislation. I have no doubt. The power of that service user telling her story. So there is nothing more, when it comes to raising awareness of aphasia, if we do find ourselves in front of parliamentary committees or on the sofa on This Morning or The Woke Show or whatever, I would much rather that a person with lived experience of aphasia was there telling that story. It will be 1,000 times different main point. Now, there's loads of different, if you hired a public affairs company, they'll give you all sorts of ways you can think about raising awareness of things. People always talk about, though, different things like, wouldn't it be great if there was a character in the soap opera who has aphasia? Well, yes, it would. Tell you what would be even better, a character who has aphasia who's just getting on with their life and their disability isn't the point. So there are ways and means, but we need to go. We sometimes talk about autism here. There was a time when no one had heard about autism. Now, if I walk out of my office out onto Borough High Street in London, most people have a conception of autism. It might not be accurate, it might not be up to date, but people have got a rough and ready conception of autism as a thing, right? And aphasia is one of those conditions that we need to get on that same journey. Yeah. That if I meet someone on Borough High Street, they will go, oh, aphasia, that's when you have... Now, these things take time. Yeah. They take time, but, you steps on the journey.
Do you think we're moving forward, or do you think we're stuck in a rut?
This is based on no evidence whatsoever. My personal perception as someone who works in the sector across all sorts of conditions would be that it's a holding pattern. It's not really going anywhere. It's going neither forward nor back. Who do you need to know about this? Because this is another thing we've talked about. And it was something actually when we were working on dysphagia awareness. Yeah. So problems with the swallow mechanism, the swallow reflex and blockages and
tell me, sorry to interrupt.
Dysphagia is problems with swallow, which are very common after stroke. It can be choking, it can be the reflex with dementia. They cheer for some guys, but with advanced dementia, what would get you in the end would be the loss of the swallow reflex.
Yeah, right. Okay.
When the brain can no longer react to the swallow reflex, well, you're going to choke. Right. Yeah. And there are different modified textures of food and all of that. So all that whole area is called dysphagia. When we were talking about dysphagia awareness, what we realized was that our target audience wasn't really the general public. What we needed was other healthcare professions to know about it, and staff working in care homes. And so you need to think, well, of course we want there to be general awareness, but, who is it? The politicians? Is it the budget holders and the NHS commissioning the services? Is it the people with aphasia are going to meet and work with in everyday life? Actually, in that case, we needed doctors and nurses and care support workers to know about swallowing problems. They were our target audience.
Rob said this the other day, we were not about that, but about the aphasia, because I was saying to him, well, we need to kind of get, more people interested in the podcast, for instance. And Rob said, well, it's a sort of small market because it's quite contained, isn't it? And I think you've just picked on that particular point, because where do we go with it? I mean, we can tell people who have family, who have aphasia, we can talk and give them more support perhaps in the way that what we do. But I don't think we get very far with the general public or even the GPs, because the GPs are busy doing lots of things.
Yeah,
And
no, I agree. GPs are an important audience and a really hard one to crack.
Well, exactly.
I mean, it was many years ago, but I remember meeting people at the Royal College of GPs, and the then president of the Royal College of GPs said, "Do you know, Derek, I think in 30 years of dental practice, I've never referred someone to a speech therapist."
Really?
Okay. That's what made me feel good about myself. In terms of your podcast, I mean, if you can send me the link once this is up, we're absolutely going to promote it through the Royal College's channels and out there to the speech therapy community.
We are moving forward in the sense that we're talking to you for a start, because we've got that far. And one of the things that also Rob and I talked about was that probably need to get more people with actual aphasia on the podcast, because obviously we've talked to people who, charities and all that, say aphasia, and I'm working on getting some more people with aphasia to come on to the podcast, just to sort of, as you say, it's somebody's the lived experience, isn't it? So we can, rather than us talking about it.
I was just thinking about what you said about. It's a very powerful story, isn't it? This woman who they were about to sort of consign her to the dustbin, so to speak. But then somebody noticed that she had eye contact and eye movement. And then suddenly she was still in there and they were able to kind of communicate with her. Totally moving that. In a way, we need to educate the whole of society about disability in general, perhaps. I mean, but we are doing that. I guess more people are aware of it, and we have, an Olympics for disabled people with problems, movement or whatever. It's a bigger thing now, isn't it? I mean, but it is about educating us all to kind of see all the people who are a little bit different in whatever way.
I think there's a willingness. I think all of the discriminations there are in the world. I mean, sadly, there are some people who have bigoted views about disabled people. But in the main, people regard disabled people benignly and with goodwill, but they either don't think or don't know what to do, or if we're talking about disabilities that are not visible, they just don't notice.
And also, the point you made, this person might actually be your best colleague. They might actually be the best person for this job. If you can kind of unlock a way of getting them to communicate. It isn't just an act of charity, as it were, on the part of an employer or whatever, to feeling sorry for people, trying to include them and whatever. They are actually a huge productive element of society that might be being ignored. We can't afford to do that as a society as a whole.
Yeah, okay. And in line with the messages that the new UK government is putting out. Well,
this has been fantastic, and it's really interesting to talk to you, because you have some insight that I think we've not had before, because you've got this sort of wide remit, I suppose, in many ways, and in your looking at your experience as well, you're in a sort of different league.
To say my own personal experiences, I trained in linguistics. I'm a linguist. But then I spent a lot of my career in politics, working for a political party, being a special advisor to a First Minister of Scotland, working in Parliament. So, I bring that kind of both a language background and a political background to the job that I do now.
But it helps you obviously in your current position as well, does it not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think particularly that I've been alongside government ministers when they are making choices. And I know how things look from that side of the table. And from that side of the table is what are the newspapers saying? What are people in my constituency saying? Have I got any money? What am I legally required to do? So I think research, you talked about researchers earlier on, and I have a talk I do with researchers about influencing. And I think, look, as researchers, you're going to go out and collect the evidence. And then you're going to go, well, here's what the evidence says. But that's not what it's like for a politician or a decision maker. They've got a load of competing voices and pressures. And sorry to say, the scientific evidence is only one of them.
It's very layered, isn't it? What they're trying to do is, as you say, there's so many things going on all at once. and they've got to make a correct or incorrect decision. I suppose that's what happens, isn't it? And they
Yes.
go with what they think.
So it's about going, and I think this is the thing to, the work around raising the profile of aphasia. If you're talking to decision makers and budget holders, it's thinking, how can I help them? It's going to them and saying, I know that you want to get more people back into work. Here's how working with people with aphasia can help you do that.
Yeah, well, that's a takeaway.
Thank you.
No, it's been really, really interesting, and more power to your elbow, as they say.
Yeah.
Send me the link. I look forward to listening to it back and spreading the word.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this On the Tip of My Tongue podcast. We hope you found it helpful and informative. Now, if you want more help and information about strokes and aphasia, please go to stroke.org.uk, say aphasia, that's S-A-Y, aphasia, all one word, .org, or the aphasia page of nhs.uk. You're listening to On the Tip of My Tongue, a podcast dedicated to raising awareness about aphasia. If you're enjoying the podcast and finding it helpful, please subscribe to it by clicking on the Support the Show link in the description. Thank you. This has been a Buffalo Lounge production. Please follow Buffalo Lounge on all the socials.